He paid for the trip, unaware that he was offering the very freedom that would awaken his wife completely. Go, my love. A few days alone in the country. He said it was for her own good. She felt it was an invitation. He paid for the hotel, booked the massage, and without realizing it, he opened a door to something that cannot be controlled. In the soft solitude of the room, covered only by a robe that refused to stay in place, she waited. The door opened. There he was, a stranger with silent hands and eyes that made no promises. They only read what no one else could, and when he leaned in, it was to whisper without words, leaving her skin held in suspense. There, in that room of wood and silence, she discovered that certain encounters don't wound. They simply ignite. It was my husband who suggested the trip. He said I needed to relax, to clear my head, to escape the suffocating routine of the city. A few days, just for you, silence, nature. A soft bed. He spoke with that practical, gentle tone of someone who believes they are offering care, when in fact, they are simply making space. Like someone pushing a chair into a corner of the house and saying, "Go on, rest." I smiled, thanked him, and accepted. But the truth was, I had been fleeing for a long time, a silent escape, without luggage, made of absences, of kisses that had become pecks on the cheek, of touches that had become functional. Love hadn't left, but desire had, and no one seemed to notice, except for my body, which for months had been whispering urgencies I pretended not to hear. I packed with mechanical gestures, light clothes, a vanilla-scented lotion, a book that had been with me for months, unopened. And even without admitting it to myself, I packed lingerie he had never seen. A part of me still wanted to be discovered, perhaps by other eyes. The hotel was in the middle of nowhere, an elegant wooden manor surrounded by green hills and wide verandas, with the constant scent of damp earth in the air, the kind of place where the absence of noise makes your heart beat louder. The room was simple but welcoming, crisp white sheets stretched tight, pillows that were far too large, and a window that looked out onto a silent orchard. When I closed the door behind me, I felt something tighten in my chest. Fear, excitement, I couldn't tell which. At the front desk, they offered the wellness package, massage included. "It's a guest favorite," the receptionist said with a discreet smile. I just nodded. I had no idea how much that touch would change everything. The massage was scheduled for 10 in the morning, but I woke before the alarm. It was as if my body knew something unexpected was about to happen. I took a long shower, letting the towel slide slowly over my skin, as if preparing the ground. I chose a pair of light cotton panties, comfortable but pretty, and a soft, thin robe that hugged my hips delicately. It wasn't sensual, but it wasn't careless either. I heard the soft knock on the door just before the scheduled time. When I opened it, I couldn't hide my surprise. There he was, tall, broad shoulders, a well-kept beard, a clean white cotton uniform, and a steady, silent gaze that pierced through you without invading. There was something in the way he looked at me that made me feel naked before I had even undressed. There were no words, just a nod and a faint, almost imperceptible smile, like someone who already knows the dance and is just waiting for me to choose the music. My body reacted before my mind could. I felt my thighs clench and a warmth spread across my chest beneath the thin fabric of the robe. On instinct, I turned my back to guide him to the massage table, hiding the tremor in my hands. He began to prepare the room. He lit a small candle, turned on some soft instrumental music, and opened a bottle of oil with careful movements. It was all very technical, professional, but I was no longer just a client. I lay face down on the table and pulled the sheet over my body, as protocol dictated. But inside me, nothing was protocol. The sheet covered my skin, but the fire he had already lit could not be smothered by cotton. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and waited. At first, everything was as expected. The initial contact was gentle, respectful, almost distant. His palms, warmed by the oil, glided over my shoulder blades in long, rhythmic strokes. But even there, in what should have been mere technique, there was a contained intention, a precision, as if each of my muscles held an ancient secret, and he knew exactly where to look. The room was silent, save for the muffled sound of the music and my own breathing, which was beginning to change its rhythm. I pretended to be relaxed, but his every touch was pulling something hidden from me. It wasn't just hands on my skin. It was the feeling of being touched with presence, with a sense of listening, as if his fingers were reading what no one at home dared to ask anymore. When he reached the small of my back, I felt a wave of heat rise up my spine. My fingers tightened on the sheet. The towel covering my body seemed more symbolic than useful. His fingers traced the line of my waist with an almost choreographed slowness, as if approaching an invisible boundary and testing whether he could cross it. He said nothing, not a single word, not a comment. But in the silence between one movement and the next, I felt more than I could ever hear in any sentence. The weight of his hand, the pressure on the right points, the calculated pause between one glide and the next. It was as if we were conversing in a silent language made of skin, heat, and pulse. And it was there, before he had even reached the middle of my back, that I felt it. The fabric between my legs could no longer hide how much I wanted him. My womb was pulsing, and a part of me, the part that had been sleeping for so long, was whispering a silent plea for him to go further. Each time he pressed into my hips, the air escaped my lips like a choked whisper. I bit the corner of my mouth, trying to stop the sighs from taking form. But inside me, the sound was already echoing, urgent, muffled, heavy with heat. The thin towel covering my buttocks was more symbolic than real. If he wanted to, a single light gesture would be enough to move it aside, and a part of me hoped he would. But then I felt the cold touch of metal on my finger, the ring, the memory, the barrier. He asked no questions, called me no name, and yet he seemed to know who I was, or rather, who I was pretending to be. His hand slid over me like someone who understands the desire hidden beneath good intentions. When he reached the base of my glutes, his thumbs pressing firmly from one side to the other, I arched my body involuntarily. A reflex, a plea. My mind screamed, "Stop!" But my skin answered, "More." And between these voices was the weight of everything I had promised the man I slept with every night, who hadn't touched me with this hunger in so long that I wasn't even sure I remembered how. I closed my eyes tightly, trying to think of something else. Anything. But it was impossible. He was there, breathing close to me, and my body, surrendered, pulsed beneath those hands as if recognizing something ancient, something essential, something I had denied myself for far too long. I had not yet touched him, nor he me, in any direct way, but it was as if we had already given ourselves permission in the silence, and that filled me with more guilt than any crossed line ever could. "You can turn over, if you feel comfortable." His voice was the first thing to break the silence in nearly 20 minutes, deep, calm, with a timbre so steady it seemed to know exactly where it was touching me, even with words. I nodded slightly, saying nothing. My body responded before my mind. I turned slowly, covering my breasts with the towel out of pure instinct, though a part of me wished it would slip away. My legs were trembling, and it wasn't from fatigue. It was the verge of surrender. When our eyes met, time stopped. He stood there beside the table, looking at me with a silent intensity that said everything his mouth dared not. He didn't smile. He didn't look away. And for an instant, one that lasted far too long, the tension between us was no longer just physical. It was emotional. It was human. It was intimate. I hesitated. I felt shame rise in my chest. I thought of my husband, our home, the years we'd spent together. But none of that touched me in that moment, like the gaze of this man. It was a gaze that sees, not just the body, but what pulses within, what no one else notices. He took a step back, as if giving me back my space, my choice. I took a deep breath, trying to interpret his retreat. Respect? Fear? Restrained desire? I don't know. I only know that something there, in that suspended moment between two strangers, began to crumble inside me. I could still pull back. I could still say, "I think we should stop here." But I didn't. I just kept looking. And in the depths of his eyes, I realized it. He was fighting something too. The line that separated us now was growing thinner and thinner. He returned to his work with the same serenity as before. But something had changed, not in the way his hands moved. They remained firm, rhythmic, precise. The change was in the skin between us, in the air, in the seconds he lingered between one touch and the next, as if testing my reaction, as if waiting for my silence to become permission. His hands slid from my shoulders to the center of my chest, avoiding my breasts with a restrained professionalism. But when his fingers traced the side of my bust, lightly grazing the soft curve of skin that escaped from under the towel, I felt my womb contract. A fine line between a technical touch and a touch that would send me over the edge had been crossed, almost invisibly. But not to me. When he moved down to my abdomen, the palm of his hand drew a slow line from my navel to the base of my belly. The gesture was careful, but there was something in its glide that stripped me bare. It wasn't just physical pressure. It was attention. It was desire, hidden beneath care. My muscles tightened. My breathing grew uneven. He noticed. His fingers paused for a fraction of a second, long enough for my body to scream inside. "Don't stop now." But my mouth remained silent, and the towel, still intact, was the last disguise for a fidelity that was already dissolving on my skin, warmed by want. I felt the heat between my legs grow. The fabric of my panties was already clinging to my center, and the towel now seemed like a mere veil of illusion. The touch that would dissolve any notion of right or wrong had not yet come, but everything about him said that he understood, that he knew how far he could go, and how much I wished for him to cross that line. The line between care and desire couldn't be seen with the eyes, but in that moment, it burned silently where only I could feel it. His hand rested on my abdomen, motionless for an instant, as if listening to something beyond my breath. My eyes opened slowly, seeking his, and when they met, there was nothing left to hide. I didn't say yes, I made no obvious gesture, but my dilated pupils, my parted lips, the almost imperceptible tremor of my hips, everything in me was permission. He hesitated for a second. His hand slid slowly, as if crossing a minefield with reverence, and when his fingers slipped along the side of my thigh, my skin trembled with a shiver that shot up my spine and exploded at my scalp. My knees parted without command, betraying what little resistance still clothed me from within. The silence was thick, broken only by our breathing, mine, short and ragged, his, deeper, as if he were still trying to control himself. But there was no more control. The sheet slipped a little, revealing part of my breasts, but neither he nor I looked. The focus was on my center, where the heat was a pulsing, silent invitation about to be answered. His finger traced the inner curve of my thigh with precision, avoiding my core but driving me mad. I could smell the oil mixed with the warm scent of my own contained surrender. My eyes met his again, and in that instant he understood. There were no more rules. I was no longer a married woman. I was just skin, flesh, an ignited desire that could no longer be hidden. When, at last, his fingers touched the damp fabric between my legs, I let out a hoarse, muffled sigh that escaped without permission. He pressed gently, feeling my unspoken invitation, my complete surrender, and everything that was still forbidden dissolved right there, in the dark, translated into silence and touch. He lowered himself without haste, without any theatrical gesture. He simply moved with the precision of someone who knew exactly what to do. As if he recognized by scent, by the tension in the muscles, the precise point where desire ceases to be fantasy and becomes urgency. He slid his fingers along the side of my panties and pushed the fabric aside with a delicacy, as if opening a secret, a forgotten petal beneath old veils. The first touch of his mouth was almost shy but certain, a slow, intentional glide that brushed against my center with a reverence that took my breath away. My hips arched involuntarily, and my hand found his hair, pulling gently, as if pleading without a voice. My breath became a gasp. My parted lips searched for air, but what I received was heat, vibration, presence. He teased me with his mouth as if reading a long-hidden secret. Every movement was a sentence spoken without words. With every deep kiss, he peeled away, layer by layer, the restrained woman I pretended to be. I dissolved there, beneath him, in the middle of a field, in a rented room with a false name on the check-in form, but with a real, throbbing body. My skin was slick with sweat, my feet arched, my toes tensed, and the sound that escaped me was raw and broken, more a wet sigh than a scream. He alternated between soft touches and a more intense rhythm, exploring with precision what made me lose control. My hand slapped against the table. I didn't say stop, only whispered, please, unsure if I was begging him to go on or to never, ever stop. The woman who smiled at dinner parties, who took care of the house, who listened in silence, she vanished with his every touch. In her place, another was born, one who sighed without shame, with the taste of transgression on her lips and the certainty that she would never be the same again. My body began to tremble, lightly at first, like an internal whisper, a prelude. Then it grew stronger, like short, repeated waves rising from the base of my belly to my chest. I couldn't keep my eyes open anymore. Everything blurred. The light from the window seemed to flicker. The ceiling spun slowly, as if the entire room were breathing with me. He didn't stop. His mouth remained firm, rhythmic, in perfect harmony with the silent dance my body was leading. My gasps were trapped between my teeth. I bit my lips so hard I almost cried. The towel fell to the floor without me noticing. My hands gripped the sheets, then my own breasts, as if trying to anchor my existence to something physical, palpable, because everything inside me felt unmoored from reality. And then, it happened. I exploded into sensation, so intensely that I lost my breath. A raw, trembling sound escaped my throat. My hips rose, trying to flee, and at the same time, beg for more. My legs clamped against his face by reflex, and he didn't pull away. He welcomed every tremor, as if he understood that this was not just pleasure, but liberation. When it was over, I lay there, legs open, chest heaving, skin damp, hair stuck to my forehead. He was still kneeling between my thighs, looking at me. But in that moment, I wasn't his, or my husband's, or anyone's. For the first time in a long time, I was only mine. Entirely my own. I lay there for a few minutes, maybe more. My breath was still ragged, my chest rising and falling with a heavy slowness, as if each inhale brought not just air, but the memory of what had just happened. My muscles still vibrated. My eyes were wet, not with tears of pain, but from something I couldn't yet name. The world slowly came back into focus, the sound of birds outside, the discreet creak of the wood beneath the table, the scent of oil mixed with the perfume of a lit candle. But inside me, nothing felt the same. There were marks, not visible, not physical, but so deep they ached without a touch. I felt possessed, not by him, but by something I myself had locked away years ago. An old desire to feel alive, wanted, touched with truth, not with haste, not out of obligation, but with hunger and devotion. And with that feeling came the guilt, thick and present. My finger automatically searched for the ring. It was still there, firm, cold, almost like a scar. And for a second, I felt as if I had betrayed myself more than the man who slept beside me every night. But there was something else too, a silent relief, a kind of freedom. As if at last I had allowed a part of myself to come out of hiding. What pulsed in me wasn't just pleasure. It was a raw form of reconnection with my own skin, with my own emptiness, with my own wanting. I didn't know what to do with it yet, but I knew that from now on, I could no longer pretend. He said nothing. He simply rose slowly, took the folded sheet from the side of the table, and laid it over my body with an almost ritualistic gentleness. The touch of the fabric on my still warm skin made me shiver, not from the cold, but from the tenderness, as if the gesture were a final act of care, a sign of respect, or a goodbye. There was no kiss, no questions, no promises. Only his eyes, a long, deep gaze, heavy with everything that can't be written on a hotel form. A look that said, "I saw you." And I knew in that instant that he too would carry with him either the weight of what we had done or the gift of what we had lived. I didn't know what to call it yet. I wanted to thank him, to apologize. I wanted to say, "I'm sorry for wanting so much." Or maybe, "I'm sorry that what I have is not enough." But my throat closed. The sound wouldn't come, and he asked for nothing. He just looked at me for one more second, with that silence only those who have touched the forbidden can understand. He gathered the oil, blew out the candle, and walked to the door. He didn't look back, and yet I could still feel his eyes on me, on my body, in my womb, in my heart, as if he were still there, hovering inside. I lay motionless for a while, covered, naked, at peace and in ruin, all at once. Every cell in my body felt rearranged. I didn't know if this was the beginning of a fall or the first step toward liberation. I only knew that no good service could ever justify what we had experienced, and that the right words would never fit on the guest registration card. When I finally got up from the table, my legs were still unsteady. I dressed slowly, as if trying not to erase what had happened. My panties clung to my skin, still damp, a memento. The robe slid over my shoulders as if nothing had occurred. But my body knew. I straightened the sheets without thinking, pulling the corners with the care of someone who needs to restore the appearance of things. But inside, there was no going back. In my toiletry bag, between the creams, makeup, and sunscreen, I hid the stained panties. A sweaty, silent piece of the woman who had existed on that table, the one who had moaned without guilt, who had opened her legs for a stranger with eyes full of truth. Before leaving, I looked at my reflection in the mirror. My hair was a mess, my mouth slightly swollen, my eyes strangely calm. It wasn't regret I saw, it was something else, a kind of weary lucidity, a self that knew she couldn't repeat this, but also that she would never be able to forget. I carry with me the scent of the oil, the taste of myself on his mouth, the way he never called me by any name, and yet touched me as if he knew all of me. I carry with me the silence that fell when it was over, a silence that wasn't empty, it was an echo, and when I go home and lie in my bed next to my husband, I will still know. There was a moment, in a wooden room in the countryside, when I belonged only to myself, not to him, not to anyone. And that, perhaps, was the most dangerous thing of all.